Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Sunday, February 2nd, and folks, we just had the most shocking trade in NBA history. I know it's really easy to be hyperbolic in the world of sports, but really feel like that is on the nose to say we have never had a more surprising trade. I'm sure I'm not breaking any news here by the time I'm getting this podcast out. If you somehow haven't seen it, Luka Doncic is now a member of the Los Angeles Lakers in a groundbreaking trade that took place, I guess, early Sunday morning. This news broke at about 12:30 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday. Shams Charania of ESPN had the report first. I was just laying my head on the pillow, had a great night with Jess, had a couple glasses of wine, and yeah, the trade just rocked everybody's world. My phone starts blowing up. There's really never been anything like this in the history of the NBA, so we're going to break it all down. Was really tempted to get out a podcast last night to really get ahead of it. So again, I'm sure you might have seen some other media sources report on this first besides just Words with Wallace, but I had a tummy ache last night, guys. I wanted to get a full night's sleep and wanted to see if there was any other information that has broken that has come out since the trade that would make this make a little bit more sense. And spoiler alert, that's not the case. So let's dive into it and start off with the trade details themselves. Again, Shams Charania of ESPN had this first. The Lakers in this deal received Luka Doncic, Maxi Kleber, Markieff Morris. The Mavericks received Anthony Davis, Max Christie, and the Los Angeles Lakers 2029, I believe, unprotected first-round pick. And then the Jazz, Danny Ainge, just being the psycho that he is, had to get in on this action. They received Jalen Hood-Schifino, the Clippers 2025 second-round pick, and the Mavericks 2025 second-round pick. Initial thoughts when this deal broke, and again, shout out my guy Connor for literally making sure I was awake to see it. If I hadn't seen his text, I probably would have had to learn about this news this morning. First thought was Shams Charania must have been hacked, right? There's no possible way that this deal went down, that Dallas just moved on from Luka Doncic out of nowhere in the middle of the night, a week or so before the trade deadline. And of course, now that Woj is the general manager of St. Bonaventures, we don't really have that second newsbreaker in the NBA space with the same reputation as Shams Charania. So I was just waiting for that second shoe to drop where maybe he's hacked or somebody else comes out and declines the trade. But no, Shams had a couple follow-ups having to confirm that the trade is real because nobody would believe it. Bobby Marks and others in the ESPN universe jumped in to confirm the trade. So once I actually accepted that this trade was happening, which took a few minutes myself, my next thought jumped to, I hate to say this, but like Luka's injury has to be more severe than we initially let on. And obviously I don't have any information on this and I don't want to speculate about the guy's health, but for the Mavericks to just move on from Luka Doncic, like I assume that calf, maybe it's an Achilles injury. Maybe he's actually out the rest of this season. Like he must be in really tough shape physically for the Mavs to feel comfortable doing this. And even then, that doesn't seem to be the case, right? We've had a few reports come out that we'll get to in a second with more information than what was given once the initial trade broke out, but still nothing on the severity of Luka's injury. To my knowledge, that is, we have no new news and we expect to see Luka back at some point this season. So that's crazy within its own right. My third thought on this is that, wow, like Luka must have been really upset in Dallas. He must have demanded a trade. He must have made it abundantly clear he wasn't willing to sign an extension when he's eligible for another Supermax extension this summer. He must have specifically demanded a trade to the Los Angeles Lakers and they wanted to do right by him or something like that. And we could get a massive hit piece on Luka Doncic, which I'm expecting to see within the next couple of days here, giving a little bit more insight as to why Dallas would do this. But no news suggesting that he demanded a trade. So I feel pretty comfortable actually ruling that out, that even Luka was blindsided by this deal. And so, again, this is all absolutely insane. And before I give you my opinion, breaking this trade down a little bit further, let's just go over a few pieces of information that I felt like were notable that have dropped since the trade went out. The first piece of info here is a quote from Mavericks general manager Nico Harrison, who might as well be a wanted man in Dallas right about now. His quote was, "I believe that defense wins championships. I believe that getting an all-defensive center and an all-NBA player with a defensive mindset gives us a better chance. We're built to win now and in the future." So, hey, Nico must have read on the back of a box of Wheaties that defense is actually pretty important and it wins championships. That's a great slogan, Nico. I don't think you're taking into the equation that you're getting like a walking 30-10 on the offensive side of the court, which is sadly much harder to find than a defensive center. You already have a few of those on the roster, but hey, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Nico feels like this move helps the Mavericks win now. Next piece of information comes from Tim McMahon of ESPN, stating that the Mavericks had major concerns about moving forward with Luka Doncic due to his constant conditioning issues and the looming commitment of another Supermax contract extension this summer. So again, Luka, because he's made All-NBA like 5 times already, he is eligible for a Supermax extension, the largest contract you can possibly receive in the NBA, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years, $350 million, give or take. And the fact that the Mavs would be hesitant to offer Luka that deal is insane within its own right. But hey, maybe there is more, there has to be more about Luka, his health, his mindset that we don't know right now. So let's just put a tab on that. And then the final piece of information comes from Shams Charania, again of ESPN, stating that the Mavericks approached the Lakers recently and offered Luka Doncic, and Lakers brass met, and they believe the 25-year-old Doncic has the ability to be the face of the franchise for the next decade, while giving Anthony Davis a win-now move in Dallas. So the important piece of that is that the Mavericks actually approached the Lakers and were like, hey, Rob Pelinka, you guys have any interest in Luka Doncic? I have to imagine the Lakers immediately responded with yes. And while that sounds ridiculous that the Mavericks would have to be the ones to approach the Lakers, it actually makes sense because we're going to talk more about this in a second. The most damning thing about all of this is that if you're going to move on from a guy as talented as Luka Doncic, you have to let people know that he's available. You have to have a bidding war unlike anything that we've ever seen, and that wasn't the case. So in hindsight, and the fact that everybody is so surprised that this deal happened actually makes sense because the only 2 teams that actually knew about it were the Dallas Mavericks and the Los Angeles Lakers. And again, I'm not the one that's plugged in with all the front offices here and talking to general managers and asking if they knew about it, but it's been proven by a ton of different sources out there that, again, nobody saw this coming, which is completely on par for this trade happening in the middle of the night, a week before the trade deadline. This is completely out of nowhere. Why would the Mavericks do this, right? That is probably the question that all of you guys, after hearing all of this information, are probably asking yourselves, and I don't have the answer for you, but let's just dive into it a little bit deeper. The most important thing we have to remember and why this trade is so egregious on paper is that Luka is 25 years old. I don't think I need to spend too much time talking about how great Luka Doncic is, but as a reminder, again, he's a consensus top 3 player in the world. I think it's him, I think it's Jokic, and I think it's Giannis as that first class. Obviously, I still think Jokic is a head above everybody else right about now. Then if you want to get into the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the Jason Tatums, and looking at trade value, you obviously have to consider Victor Wembanyama, Anthony Edwards, etc., etc. But that being said, he's already been to 5 different All-NBA teams, and he would have been well on his way to a 6th All-NBA selection had he not gotten hurt earlier this season. He's currently 2nd all-time in playoff points per game. And I don't want to be too harsh about the core that the Mavericks have had in place around Luka the past couple years, but if you remove Luka Doncic from the equation, it's a pretty mediocre team. And to drag a mediocre team to not just one Western Conference Finals appearance, but an additional NBA Finals appearance 2 of the last 3 years, whatever benchmarks you had for Luka at this point in his career, already knowing that he's a generational talent, he's checked every box. Yes, he hasn't won a title, but he's come damn close with teams that, again, nobody picked Dallas coming out of the West last year. Literally nobody. Just because they got a couple crafty moves at the deadline and you bring in PJ Washington, you bring in Daniel Gafford, nobody was like, wow, those moves on its own make Dallas a title contender. But that's the type of leap that you see teams make when you have a player that has the potential to be truly an all-time great. Diving in deeper to the deal, again, going back to it, the Lakers only gave up 1 pick in the deal. All the Mavericks really have to show for it is, again, Anthony Davis, a 2029 first-round pick, and Max Christie, I guess he's a young ascending player, but Max Christie's a role player. You got no additional picks besides that 2029 first. You have no pick swaps. You have no young building blocks. And not to mention, that 1 pick that you got, again, the Lakers 2029 first-round pick, that is a bet against Luka Doncic in his age 29 season, which is, again, typically his absolute prime is going to be when he's age 29. So you're not even looking at that 2029 first round pick and assuming it's going to be a top 5, top 10, even a lottery pick. No chance. I mean, I'm not going to say no chance, but it is extremely unlikely that pick is going to return value because you just gave them a 25-year-old who is already one of the best players in the world. And look, it's kind of sad that it's taken this long in the podcast to address just how fantastic Anthony Davis is at basketball. I love Anthony Davis. I believe he should have been an all-star starter in the Western Conference, but the reality is he's 31 years old. And he's been really healthy this season, and he was really healthy last season, and he played in 76 games. But if you look at the previous seasons for Anthony Davis, he played in 56 games the year previously. He played in 36 games the year before that, and 62 games the year before that. So it's been really rocky for AD and his ability to stay healthy. He turns 32 next month, and look, he's had a really awesome campaign this year, but he's not even healthy right now. I mean, it should be a pretty mild injury. He strained his abdominal muscle earlier this week, but even then, he's going to be out at least a few more games. And so you're getting a guy, obviously Luka's hurt right now, and that's part of all this, but you're also trading for a guy that isn't healthy right now to begin with. So if anything, the most damning thing you can say about the Dallas Mavericks is like, why on earth would you take your championship window and shrink it? I don't care what you think of Anthony Davis and the Mavericks' chances to contend this season, but good God, like, you just took a 25-year-old as your best player and your building block to what do you have now? Like, you have Kyrie, who's fantastic, but he turns 33 next month in March. And you have Anthony Davis, who turns 32 next month in March. And even if you go out on a limb and say that the Mavericks have a better chance to win this season, which on its own is a stretch, again, given that we just saw Luka lead that team to the finals last year, it's just insane to take your window and shorten it like what they just did. And you got no young building blocks in return and only one first round pick. It is unfathomable. If I'm Nico Harrison right now, like, I think that's the other piece of this. I think he should go into hiding. I think he needs to go get witness protection program because he is not safe in Dallas right now. And honestly, he probably shouldn't be. Not only is this trade egregious because you just traded a top 3 player before he hits the prime of his career, which again has really never happened in NBA history. And I didn't go through every trade in NBA history this morning, but it's pretty safe to assume guys like Luka are almost always untouchable. But you didn't tell anybody about it. You didn't tell all 28 other teams that Luka was available. He's still under contract for another year and a half at minimum, right? So even if Luka's unhappy, even if you're already convinced and the new owners come in and they're convinced they don't want to give Luka that supermax extension, then you have to do your due diligence in doing the whole song and dance. Hey, Luka's available. Hey, come get Luka. Give me your best offer. There would have been a bidding war unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of the NBA. Like, it's not crazy to assume you're getting 5 first-round picks, as many picks as you can trade as humanly possible, in addition to a young player. Probably not on the same level of talent as Anthony Davis, obviously, but somebody who's 23, 24 and has a lot of long-term upside. That is like the minimum package that you can expect to return for Luka Doncic. We just saw what Rudy Gobert and Mikal Bridges and Kevin Durant and what all these guys have gotten traded for, and all those packages were in the neighborhood of 5 first-round picks. And picks aren't everything, especially when, again, you are getting a guy like Anthony Davis back in return. But it is unbelievable to just do this trade in the middle of the night, send him to the most popular franchise in the NBA, and not even do your due diligence of telling other teams that he's available. And look, I think Nico Harrison, again, general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, I think this guy has to be an egomaniac. He's made some great moves, and maybe he just felt like he had the hot hand right now after making that Kyrie trade, which I was critical in the moment of, which I was obviously wrong about. Kyrie's been incredible in Dallas, and those awesome moves at the deadline last year to get PJ Washington, to get Daniel Gafford, and maybe just him being a Nike guy, having these connections with the players. It was also come out that he has a really close relationship with Anthony Davis, that he just felt too comfortable making this type of move. And even if you want to go out and say that, like, there is something wrong with Luka and there's something wrong with his conditioning, there's something wrong with his health. Obviously, it hasn't affected him that much if they've had as much team success as he's had the past few years. But what will motivate Luka Doncic more than trading him, especially to the most popular franchise in the NBA? You're placing a chip on that guy's shoulder the size of a school bus. Like, this guy is going to be carrying so much baggage and hatred toward the Dallas Mavericks. This is going to give him the motivation to fix whatever problems internally. And even if that doesn't 100% work out, the deal still makes sense for the Los Angeles Lakers. Like, I can understand that there is something going on with Luka that we don't know about, but you can't question that guy's competitiveness, right? Like, when he's on the court, he is one of the most competitive motherfuckers we've ever seen, certainly in the NBA right now. And so that guy, you're going to flip a switch in that guy, and it's just so hard to imagine that this trade doesn't blow up in your face in such a massive fashion. Now, let's move on and talk about what this means for the Los Angeles Lakers. And I'm not going to lie, like, the immediate fit of Luka next to LeBron James, as exciting as that sounds, like, that's really clunky. Like there's a lot of issues on that roster. Those guys have very similar styles. They bring similar things to the table as far as being like a one-man band on offense, being a supercomputer that can process anything the defense throws at them. And they like to play slow. They like to play at their own pace. They like to dissect what's happening. And they're both bigger guys with significant defensive concerns at this point in his career. And not to mention, you just traded away Anthony Davis, in which was already a pretty weak front court rotation. Like you're looking at guys like Jackson Hayes, Christian Koloko. You just got Jared Vanderbilt back. That's great. That's a really weak front court. So there's massive holes all over the place on this team. But you still make that trade 10 out of 10 times, because what the Los Angeles Lakers just did is the opposite of what Dallas just did, right? Dallas shrunk their window. Now all their best players are well in their 30s. And now the Lakers just got, again, a top 3 player in the NBA who's 25 years old. They are now going to be contenders every single year for at least the next 5 years, as long as Luka Doncic is a member of the Los Angeles Lakers, because that's how special Luka is. And it's going to take some time. Like it's going to take some time for LeBron and Luka to figure it out, right? Like again, it's going to be clunky. It's going to be awkward. They might not even be a great team at first, even when both guys are playing, but I'm going to bet on the generational talents to figure out how they're going to complement each other, how they're going to work together, and they're going to find ways to play winning basketball alongside each other. And especially once the Lakers have a full offseason to address the hole in the front court, once they bring in some buyout guys or whoever, some veterans to support the cast and really shape the roster around those guys. And look, they still have other talented players that, Austin Reeves, who would have been an awesome get for Dallas in this deal that they didn't get. Guys like Dorian Finney-Smith, who is a very close friend of Luka Doncic, who already knows how to play alongside Luka. Like, it's not like they're starting from zero. I just can't sit here and tell you that the Lakers are immediately going to contend for a title because the fit is clunky. But it doesn't matter when you extended your window by 5 years. The Lakers have time to figure this out, and it is a home run deal if I've ever seen it. It really kills me just focusing on myself as a Celtics fan right now. Like, I obviously am based outside of Dallas, so I love picking on the Mavericks. I love kind of making fun of them because I'm surrounded by a lot of Mavericks fans, and so it was really fun, obviously, having the Celtics play in Dallas for the finals last year and all that stuff. So I typically root against the Mavericks a little bit more than what I would normally because, I'm based here. I'm anti-Maverick. But I can't even do a victory lap on the Mavs fans in my life because as a Celtics fan, I can't root for the Lakers. I can't be happy to see the Lakers get a generational talent just handed to them. And by the way, this isn't the first time that the Lakers have gotten blessed with a superstar in the prime of their career, because this adds to the list of guys like Wilt, guys like Kareem, Shaq, Pau Gasol, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and now Luka, who have played for the Los Angeles Lakers without the team drafting them. And I did just listen to Bill Simmons and Russillo break this all down, and one of those guys had that, which is crazy to have that many top 20 to 30 all-time players play for a franchise like the Lakers when you don't even have to draft those guys. That's the type of privilege that comes along being in a market like Los Angeles, where you have deep pockets, where you have a city that everybody wants to play in. It's ridiculous. And I'm not normally the type of guy to shoehorn some LeBron legacy talk into massive events like this, but it actually does apply, given that LeBron James is now going to be playing with Luka Doncic for the next 5 years. I think this trade actually has the ability to add significantly to LeBron James's legacy and ultimately shape the greatest of all time argument for generations to come, right? Because LeBron is now going to be on a contending team for as long as he wants to stick with Luka and the Lakers, right? He's obviously 40 right now. He's currently the oldest player in the NBA. Has not stopped him from turning in an incredible season in which he's obviously an all-star starter in the Western Conference. And I actually do believe, obviously LeBron is past his prime, so to speak. We've seen certainly better years from LeBron. We've seen certainly better seasons from him athletically, all that stuff. But we haven't even seen that version of LeBron James where he slows it down even more, where the minutes get reduced significantly, where he's willing to miss a few more games in the regular season and punt on any sort of regular season awards and really take a back seat and just save his juice for the playoffs, and where he really takes a back seat offensively and doesn't mind somebody else being the full-on hub of the offense. We haven't even seen that stage of LeBron James, which I'm sure he has the ability to adjust and step into at some point. So it's not crazy to say, despite the fact that LeBron's already 40, that he can't go another 5 years and really be contributing to winning basketball. And those teams, again, are going to have a chance to win a title. And so if LeBron, and this is a massive if to assume a championship for anybody, even a team with Luka Doncic, but if the Lakers are able to actually go out and win one, maybe even two more titles, and you add that on top of what has already been a beyond Hall of Fame level career for LeBron James, I already don't run into anybody younger than me that has any consideration that Michael Jordan is the greatest of all time. If LeBron gets up to 5, maybe even 6 rings because of this acquisition of Luka Doncic, which certainly is not outside the realm of possibility, it's going to be really hard to make the case for Michael Jordan for a lot of folks out there. Some people are never going to move on from Michael Jordan being the best player of all time, but just don't let LeBron get a couple more rings because it's going to swing the greatest of all time argument for at least a significant amount of NBA fans out there. And I have to touch upon this as well because normally I think like mentorship and the idea of a great player learning from another great player who's one of his teammates is often overrated in really all sports, not just the NBA. But I do think there is something to be said about generational talents that happen to play together that can relate to one another because there aren't many peers for LeBron James, and there's certainly not like another one-to-one comp out there for anybody to LeBron James, but Luka's damn close, right? Like Luka is one of the closest fits to that we've seen with just how good he was immediately upon entering the NBA, with him already being the most valuable player of the EuroLeague before he even stepped foot in an NBA game. Like this guy can at least relate a little bit to LeBron James, and now that LeBron James actually has a vested interest in helping Luka get his body right, get his mind right, and maybe even show him like this fountain of youth that LeBron seems to have found because he's completely reinventing how we think of aging athletes with how dominant he's been into his age 40 season right now. Like it's not a perfect one-to-one comp because obviously LeBron is a way better athlete than Luka is or ever will be. But I do trust that, again, with Luka, with this extra motivation, with him being traded by the team that drafted him, being traded by the team he dragged to an NBA Finals, like, this is going to be the wake-up call he needs to actually lock in and certainly heed the advice of one of the greatest to ever do it in LeBron James. So I'm a little scared of what Luka looks like if LeBron really takes him under his wing and Luka really wants to learn. And those two guys have like the full offseason together to gel and get right. Like, it's frightening. It's genuinely frightening. And this is coming from me. I'm very confident as a Celtics fan. I'm very confident in my team for this season. It is terrifying for the entire NBA to see those two guys with time to gel and work together. It's freaky. And so final thoughts on this, and I guess if you want to say that this is like a quick zag, I do want to just throw in there that I think right now, again, right now, not defending the trade, not anything like that, the Mavericks are probably better than the Los Angeles Lakers after that deal. I am still assuming that if Luka does come back, like his conditioning is going to be rough, right? They're clearly frustrated with Luka, and now he has a bad calf where it makes it exceedingly difficult to do cardio to begin with, right? And so he's probably gaining weight, and he was already a little bit out of shape, and then he can't use that leg. I'm sure there's new technology where if he wants to, he's able to get a workout in, but you're not going to be able to replicate game speed of an NBA. And so even if Luka does come back this season, he's going to be in pretty tough shape. And ultimately, the core that they have in place in Dallas with Kyrie Irving, Anthony Davis, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, Quentin Grimes, Najee Marshall, Klay Thompson, like that's a really good team. And that is much better than the weird cast that the Lakers have in place right now. However, like I just said, once the Lakers have a full offseason to fill the hole in the front court and make some tweaks to the roster and really build around that vision that Luka and LeBron have, like that's undoubtedly gonna flip. You would much rather take the Los Angeles Lakers side in this trade, and you would much rather take the outlook of the roster over the next 5 years. So all I have to say is that Dallas, you better win this year. You better find a way to win a title literally this season because that's kind of what we're talking about with your window right now. Like they'll still be very good next year, assuming they keep everybody in place, but to say they're contenders, I'm not even convinced of that, and it would be unprecedented for Dallas to go out and win a title this year, given the complete roster overhaul that they've had in the middle of the season. We just have no track record of that actually working. So, in totality, again, this is the most shocking trade in NBA history. Again, I didn't go through every single trade, look into it, and report back, but it's safe to assume that guys on Luka's level, especially in their age 25 season, they don't get dealt like this, and they certainly don't get dealt in the middle of the night without a bidding war. I think it's maybe 2 to 3 teams that might not answer the phone on a potential Luka Doncic trade, like maybe the Boston Celtics. Even then, like you try to shoehorn Jalen into that, you try to make it work, even with the team being well positioned for a repeat title run here. Even beyond that, I don't know. Like Oklahoma City with their treasure chest of picks, they would be able to make a better offer, right? Like Denver, they're not moving on from Jokic, but they're willing to move on from anything else. And, Luka and Jokic would love to play with each other. San Antonio, they're not moving Wemby, but they're willing to move heaven and earth to get him, and they have a lot of picks to do so. So It's just every single team in the NBA would have to take a call for Luka Doncic at the end of the day. And ultimately, there was one team that had the opportunity to trade for him, and it was, of course, the most popular franchise in the NBA. So the rich get richer. The Lakers do it again, and I'm excited to see how this plays out. I did just want to add in that right before I recorded this podcast, I just bought tickets to the Lakers and Luka's return to Dallas for the first time, which is going to be April 9th. And so I am so excited. I have actually never seen LeBron play in person to begin with, which is kind of crazy. And so they were on my list of priorities to see this season anyways. And now you have the Luka tribute video, which is certainly going to be playing. And hopefully by April, I mean, this is, the final weeks of the regular season. So it's quite often that teams don't have much to play for in terms of seeding and everything like that. But Luka's not going to miss a chance to return to play in Dallas if he's healthy. Same thing with LeBron. I mean, he's too into all the big moments. He's not going to miss that game unless he's significantly injured, which obviously we're not hoping for. But that game should be amazing. I can't wait to record a podcast after that and let you know how it goes. But yeah, this is certainly the most shocking trade in NBA history, and I'm excited to see how it plays out the rest of the way. All right, I guess now I'll move on to the regularly scheduled program I had planned for this podcast. We got the trade deadline coming up in a couple of days, so was going to do some fake trades. Believe it or not, didn't have a Luka deal built into the agenda here. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to take a quick sip of my water out of my Dallas Mavericks commemorative 2024 NBA Finals cup that I got for attending a game last year. Just going to... yeah, Mavericks fans that cherish the moment, maybe retroactively buy yourself some 2024 NBA Finals gear. Don't know when the next time you're going to be making it back is, so sorry about that. I did want to go through what else we can expect for the trade deadline coming up on Thursday and a few headlines there before we close things out with some All-Star talk. We had the reserves announced as well as dunk contest participants, the new All-Star game format, stuff like that. But starting off with what else we can expect from the trade deadline, my original headliner for this podcast comes from Shams Charania earlier this week, in which he reported that the Sacramento Kings are expected to open up trade talks for De'Aaron Fox ahead of the deadline. Sources say that Fox has a target destination in mind ahead of 2026 free agency. So Fox is available. Somewhat surprising, all things considered, but if you look at De'Aaron Fox in his season this year, they go out and they get DeMar DeRozan in the offseason. They lean in a little bit more to their best offensive lineup, and now they're starting Malik Monk and playing him more minutes than ever before. I'm not going to say that De'Aaron Fox and his skill set are redundant with those guys there, because I still think he is the most talented player of those three, but having two other guys that can handle the ball, that can initiate their own offense, that can take and make shots at the end of close games, I think that makes De'Aaron Fox's role certainly more expendable, and I'm sure maybe he's a little bit frustrated with his role on this team that still continues to be middle of the pack in the Western Conference, doesn't look like it has a real chance to contend. So I guess for him, maybe that was enough to make him feel a little bit unhappy and want out of there, and at least he, I guess in some ways, had the decency to let the team know, I'm probably not going to re-sign with you guys in 2026. You should probably start looking to move me now. It has been widely reported that his top destination is San Antonio, which I think that's where everybody would have had him mocked to be traded anyway. Super exciting for the thought of getting a young star to pair with Victor Wembanyama, getting a guy that can handle the ball and certainly create his own shot in addition to creating easy looks for Wemby. That is super exciting, and I guess ultimately, because we haven't had any reports say otherwise, that is probably the favorite for where De'Aaron Fox ends up, and so don't want to spend a ton of time on that. I don't know exactly what that trade would be in return, but I think it is worth noting some other potential suitors would be the Houston Rockets, right? I think I would feel a lot more excited about Fox in Houston maybe a few weeks ago. Recently, we've seen Amen Thompson and his playmaking reach like a new level. Even though he's not like a primary point guard, so to speak, he certainly has that skill set. So if you're Houston, do you really want to bring in another guard that's going to take the ball out of Amen's hands? Certainly, it would be an upgrade over Fred VanVleet, and I wouldn't want to rule that out if I'm Houston, but I feel like it's less of an obvious fit than it was a few weeks ago, if that makes sense. I think a team that I weirdly have seen nobody mention in the De'Aaron Fox business is Orlando. Like, boy, has their offense struggled recently, and I know that they're still missing Jalen Suggs, but he shouldn't be the type of player that immediately comes in and changes everything that you're missing on offense, because even with Paulo, even with Franz playing arguably the best basketball of his career, like this team is struggling to reach like 100, 110 points on a night-to-night basis, and getting a ball-dominant player that can create shot for himself, again, create shots for others, I think they would be a perfect fit for De'Aaron Fox. No idea if he has any interest in Orlando, and ultimately with him hitting free agency in about a year and a half, he would need to give that blessing of, hey, I would be willing to sign in Orlando before Orlando goes out to make that move. But that is a team in the Eastern Conference. And as a Celtics fan, I would not want to see Fox in Orlando because I think they would immediately be terrifying if they're able to maintain guys like Jalen Suggs, pair him with De'Aaron Fox in the backcourt, and then still keep Paolo, Franz, and like the riches of big men that they have available off the bench. Like, I'm sorry, Orlando would be a terrifying team right away, and I just haven't seen them mentioned in the De'Aaron Fox sweepstakes. Some other names to expect some potential deals for later this week. Jimmy Butler, I expect him to go somewhere, right? Maybe it's Phoenix, maybe it's Golden State, maybe it's Memphis, maybe it's Houston. I think those are probably the top 4 teams. If I had to guess, I will say that if you missed my last podcast, Sean Jones of the Sean Jones NBA show came on and gave a pretty convincing Jimmy Butler argument on behalf of the Phoenix Suns and why the Suns should look to do that. So definitely give that a listen if you haven't already. And I've definitely warmed up on the idea of Jimmy Butler in Phoenix, more so just because he's an upgrade in that Bradley Beal spot, right? Bradley Beal would have to be in the deal, even though he's been playing a little bit better off the bench for Phoenix as of late. I still think that's an upgrade. Does it change the fortunes of Phoenix as a team? Probably not. Some other names on the lookout for: Cam Johnson, right? Teams like Cleveland, teams like Oklahoma City could be interested. Zach LaVine, I've heard him linked to the Milwaukee Bucks. Likely Chris Middleton picks and Bobby Portis maybe going back in return. Probably would have to get a few other teams involved in the deal as well, but getting Zach LaVine would immediately make Milwaukee more of a threat. Does it make them contenders, especially having 2 guys in Dame and Zach LaVine that you can hunt on the defensive end of the court? If your teams that are playing the Bucks, that's a little concerning, but it definitely makes the Bucks more exciting and probably more competitive if they're able to pull that deal off. And then the Pelicans, right? What are they going to do? Is guys like Zion Williamson, are they going to be available? I doubt it. I doubt we see a Zion trade. Maybe we see a CJ McCollum trade. It seems like he's in trade rumors every single year. I'm just not banking on it. I just think it's been such a year from hell from the Pelicans, and it's kind of sad that we will have literally never seen a game in which DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson, and Brandon Ingram have all been healthy at the same time. So I don't really know how you decide to make a move when you haven't even seen what your team looks like at full strength. So I doubt that New Orleans does anything that crazy besides maybe dealing CJ McCollum for younger players and some draft capital and giving guys like Jordan Hawkins a little bit more minutes. So that's kind of what we can expect later this week as far as the trade deadline. Moving on, we have some negative news, I guess, to get out, some injuries to update. I mentioned Derek Lively shortly before, and I don't think we really talked about it on the podcast that I just had come out with Sean last week, but Derek Lively injured his foot. It was initially reported that he had a foot fracture, and he was supposed to be out 2 to 3 months, and then it was later updated that it's actually an ankle fracture, and he will be reevaluated in 1 month. So, again, that championship window, so to speak, for the Dallas Mavericks might be a little bit more dicey missing Derek Lively. We know Anthony Davis has always wanted to play the power forward position. He's always been hesitant to play center, even though he's fantastic at either spot. And I think one of the huge draws to this deal, if you are Anthony Davis, is like, wow, now I have Derek Lively to play center. Now I have Daniel Gafford to play center. Well, we have to hope that Derek Lively will be back at some point this season. If it ends up being a foot injury, that 2 to 3 month timeline might even be a conservative estimate because he is 7 feet tall and foot injuries are a nightmare to begin with. So hopefully we see Lively back in roughly a month. And then we also had some sad news coming out of Charlotte. I didn't talk about this. It's kind of old news at this point, but Brandon Miller's done for the season with a wrist injury, which really sucks. Was excited to see his development and wanted to lock in on watching the Hornets a little bit more just because I feel like I didn't necessarily see like a massive year 2 leap for Brandon Miller, even though some of the counting stats went up. But hopefully it's a wrist injury. It should be a pretty simple procedure and won't have any limitations going into the next season. And then the bad news for New Orleans just continues to pile up. It actually took place in their game against the Celtics earlier this week. DeJounte Murray tore his Achilles. Really tough season for DeJounte. Was starting to get into a groove a little bit. He broke his hand and I want to say the first game of the season, something crazy like that, just for him to tear his Achilles, which is arguably the worst injury you can suffer as an NBA player. So definitely wishing him the best. That's really sad for him, and it just adds to a nightmare season for the Pelicans and just makes it even more unlikely that they would be able to rally and make a run and a push for a play-in spot in the Western Conference, considering the hole that they're already in. I do want to talk about the All-Star teams that were released. I obviously gave my selections on the previous podcast at the top of the episode, and then we had the full All-Star reserves released on Thursday. Let's just fly through that real quick, starting in the Eastern Conference. Again, the starting lineup was Jalen Brunson, Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Giannis, and Karl Towns as the starters in the East, and they will be joined by Jaylen Brown, Pascal Siakam, Darius Garland, Cade Cunningham, Evan Mobley, Damian Lillard, and Tyler Herro as the rest of the reserves. This was interesting, right? Again, I'm not mad at this because I think the reality is that all of these guys are playing at an all-star level in both conferences, so it's not really a matter of any of these guys being deserving to be an all-star. It's just the question is, are there other guys in the conference that are more deserving to be NBA all-stars? And so if you really wanted to nitpick and look at the top snub in the Eastern Conference, I would make the argument for Tyrese Maxey. I said he should have been in last week, and even since then, I think he's got something crazy like 7 straight 30-point games, and he carried them to a win over Cleveland earlier in the week. Like, he is just on a heater of all heaters while still having no minutes at all from Joel Embiid, still getting really inconsistent performances from Paul George. So I think Maxey will place a huge chip on his shoulder with the dominance he's had. Trae Young certainly is upset about not being selected either. He had a really good case, and I probably would have had Trae Young in there as well. If I were to handpick the guys that Maxey and Trae should replace, it's probably Darius Garland and Tyler Herro. Herro especially is probably the least deserving East All-Star in my opinion, still having a fantastic season in his own right. Trae took to Twitter and said that it's no longer called getting snubbed from the All-Star team. It's called getting trade, which was kind of corny if you ask me, but I do understand the frustration with the numbers that Trae's putting up. So, look, you can definitely make an argument for either of those guys. And if you really want to get creative, you can look at LaMelo Ball, who's having a really dominant season in Charlotte as far as the counting stats. The issue is that Charlotte is not a very good team. They're still not winning many games. And I think LaMelo's played like barely over 30 games. So he's missed a lot of time and recently injured his ankle again to begin with. So I don't even know if he'll be healthy for the All-Star game to begin with. So I would never really considered LaMelo Ball. And look, I don't like Tyrese Halliburton, but it is worth noting he was like an all-star starter and an all-NBA guy last season, and he wasn't even really in consideration to making the team this season. And I don't think he deserved it based on his performances, but in a normal year, like, whatever he is, 18 and 11, and still shooting the ball at a decent clip and not turning the ball over that much, like that is an all-star caliber season, but he did not deserve to make it. Moving on to the Western Conference, the starting lineup, if I remember correctly, it is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Nikola Jokic, and they will be joined by Anthony Edwards, Anthony Davis, James Harden, Jaren Jackson Jr., Alperen Şengün, Jalen Williams, and Victor Wembanyama. So if we turn our attention to the top snubs in the Western Conference, I'd say the top of that list is probably Domantas Sabonis. Like, he's leading the league in rebounding, I want to say, and I'm just spitballing these stats at the top of my head. I think he's got like 22 points a game, 14 rebounds, and like 7 or 8 assists, and he's actually shooting the ball a career high from 3. It's on a low number of attempts, but I think he's like damn near the league leaders in 3-point percentage after that wasn't really a part of his game at all in previous seasons. It's just hard for me to imagine a guy like Şengün in over Sabonis. I understand why they went with a guy like Şengün, just because the Rockets are currently the 2nd seed in the Western Conference, while the Kings are more middle of the pack, like around like the 9-10 seed. So I get it. You value winning when it comes to selecting these All-Star games, but ultimately Sabonis is having a much better season than guys like Şengün, so that's hard to see. I also think Kyrie, Devin Booker, I probably would have had those guys in as well over guys like maybe Jaren Jackson Jr. and certainly James Harden. I think Harden is having a very good season, no doubt about it, but he's pretty inefficient. He's turning the ball over quite a bit, and I think there's 2 other guys on the Clippers that have real, at least arguments to be made for all-star selections, and Norm Powell and even Zubac with how dominant he's been this year. So it's tricky. Again, all these guys are playing at all-star levels. If I just had to say who is more deserving of being an all-star, I'd probably put in Sabonis over Şengün, and I'd probably go with Devin Booker over James Harden, or maybe Kyrie over James Harden. Ultimately, I think I'm fine with Jaren Jackson, just given the two-way stuff that guy gives. Like, I wish he gobbled up a few more rebounds. I still don't really understand why that's not a part of his game, but offensively, he's been on another level this year and still giving you a lot on the defensive end of the court. So congratulations to Jaren Jackson Jr. for that. And just a few other notes and things that I wanted to talk about here. Quickly, the All-Star Game format. I said I would talk about that at some point before the game. So just so we know what to expect, it's not East versus West, and it's not even like the traditional draft format that we've had the past couple years as well. They're actually having the TNT crew draft 3 different All-Star teams, 3 different teams of 8 players each. So Shaq, Kenny, and Charles Barkley are all going to be drafting 8 different All-Star players, and I believe that takes place on Thursday night. And there's going to be 3 different All-Star games, right? It's going to be 2 of those All-Star teams playing against one another, and then the winning team of the Rising Stars game that's played on Friday night is going to get the chance to compete against the NBA All-Stars. And so my gut reaction on this is I don't like it, right? I think it is pretty dumb, and I think it's kind of ridiculous to give the Rising Stars and players in their first and second season that normally wouldn't have a chance to sniff an All-Star game the chance to share the platform with the NBA All-Stars on Sunday night. But it might work. Like what at this point, I'm open to there needing to be some sort of fix and some sort of change to increase the player motivation and increase the intensity that we see from the NBA All Stars in the game on Sunday night. And so I'm sure the guys in the Rising Star game, that's going to become a lot more watchable with those young players having the chance to compete against the All Stars. So I expect Friday night to be more entertaining. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that NBA All Stars don't want to be embarrassed and lose to a bunch of rookies and second year players, maybe that is the push that they need. Now, it is going to be a little clunky to see like what two all-star teams have to play against one another and then what team gets to play against like the rookies and the sophomores in the first game, and ultimately the winners of those first two games will play in the all-star championship game at the end of the night. So, it'll be interesting. I don't know off the top of my head exactly how long those games are going to be. They're obviously going to be shortened games if we're going to be having three different games in the same night, but it's something I think, just knowing the TNT crew, the draft itself should be entertaining. So I'm definitely going to make it a point to watch Shaq and Kenny and Chuck pick the teams on Thursday night. I think there'll be some laughs along the way, and it'll be funny to see who the last pick is. So it is cool that we're getting that live experience of having that played out on national TV to get some content out of it. So I am going to reserve full judgment on the All-Star game until it happens. My gut is I don't love it, but if it works, I'll be singing their praises after the All-Star game in a couple of weeks. And then I did just want to touch on the dunk contest participants real quick because that was announced as well. It's really bad, dude. It's Mac McClung for the third year in a row. We have a G Leaguer who is literally not playing in the NBA. I get it. He's technically listed on the Orlando Magic roster, but I'm fairly confident after watching the Magic a bit this season that I'm sure he's played more games in the G League than he has the NBA this year. And that's pretty pathetic that Mac McClung's in there again. And then we have Stephon Castle, probably the only real good get. He's been a really talented rookie for San Antonio, and he's had some great in-game dunks. So I'm excited to watch Castle. I think Matas Buzelis as well from the Chicago Bulls, first-year player. He's really tall. He throws down some pretty crazy dunks, but we all know in the dunk contest, like the taller you are, like the less cool the dunks usually look. So it'll be an uphill climb. He doesn't play a ton in Chicago right now, but I expect his minutes to increase a little bit as we progress into the season. And then the final get is Andre Jackson Jr., who, yes, he's starting for the Milwaukee Bucks. Doesn't give you much on the offensive end of the court. He is definitely a high flyer. I will note I was watching the Bucks play the Spurs the other night, in which Wemby and the Spurs ended up blowing out the Bucks, and so Andre Jackson was in there for garbage time as well. Had a fast break and went to throw down a windmill and missed it terribly. Like, didn't even come close to completing the dunk. Missed it on the fast break and just added to the embarrassment of getting blown out, and you're trying to showboat on a fast break, which I do respect him going for the attempt. Like, hey, I'm in the dunk contest. People don't know who I am. I'm in a fast break. Let's try to entertain a little bit here, even though we're getting blown out. But it wasn't exactly confidence inspiring for Andre Jackson Jr., and he just threw down a terrible attempt. So with that, again, Mac McClung, Stephon Castle, Matas Buzelis, Andre Jackson Jr., you got no guys that are even coming close to playing in the All-Star game. I think if you combine their points per game on the season, you'd get to around like 22 points per game total among the four participants. 0 from Mac McClung, probably like 15 from Castle, and like, 7 combined from Matas and Andre Jackson Jr. Those guys don't contribute much on offense. So it's pretty sad. I'm really disappointed with it. And I think beyond anything else, I think it's just pathetic that Mac McClung, they keep forcing this G Leaguer into the dunk contest. I know he's a fantastic dunker. I know he's won and deserved to win the past couple years, but the reality is this is the NBA dunk contest. We don't need to be putting G Leaguers in there. If you can't get at least, I would love to get 4 NBA stars, let alone like 4 NBA players. And the fact that we keep shoehorning this G Leaguer in there, like, I don't want to be too hard on Mac McClung himself, because I guess if I was him, I would keep taking the opportunity if the NBA wants me in there to, this is my moment, right? Like, this is how I'm making a name for myself. I'm not turning down that publicity, but part of me is like, have some shame. Like, I'm not an NBA player, and I keep doing this. Like, aren't you a little embarrassed at some point? I don't know, man. That's just me. So not exactly excited for the dunk contest, but we'll cover that later on as well. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Words with Wallace. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully the people of Dallas, it's 80 degrees right now, so they can get out, maybe enjoy a round of golf like I'm about to do on this beautiful day in Dallas while everybody's mourning. I'm literally like sweating as I'm recording this podcast right now, so I'm going to get up out of here. But be sure to follow @Words with Wallace on everything that includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Support the show on social media. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. And be sure to support all my content there. I should be back, I guess, if there's another crazy trade that takes place later in the week. It would probably be on like Wednesday or Thursday. Maybe I'll do like another emergency pod, so to speak, if we do have a groundbreaking deal. Otherwise, expect to hear from me next Sunday or Monday once we can evaluate everything that took place during the trade deadline. Maybe some fun stuff on how the All-Star draft goes with the TNT guys as well. But I will talk to you guys then. Peace.